We begin with several key primary elections, including the Senate race in Maine that could determine which party controls the upper chamber. That's why this matters. CBS News projects Graham Platner has secured the Democratic nomination, and that's despite dealing with a string of controversies. This morning, he was asked on MS Now if he expects more public accusations to be made against him. Here's how he just responded.
There is nothing out there that is going to will run counter to any of the stories that I've talked about openly this entire campaign. I've been very open about the fact that I struggled, very open about the fact I had a long litany of failed relationships for years because I myself was not in a good place. And then every now and again, we will have a media outlet or a politically motivated attack come up and try to drag it all up. But it's all very much within the exact same story that I've told this entire time.
Now, Platner will face off against incumbent Senator Susan Collins, who ran unopposed on the Republican side. And a full week after California's primaries were held, CBS News now projects Republican Steve Hilton will go up against Democrat Javier Becerra in the governor's race. And the gubernatorial race in South Carolina, this is also taking shape. CBS News projects Trump-endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Abbott and State Attorney General Alan Wilson will advance to a runoff for the GOP nomination. Now, one of them will ultimately square off against this man, the projected Democratic primary winner, Jermaine Johnson. And we have a team of reporters following all these elections for us. We've got Anthony Salvanto here in New York to break down the results. CBS News correspondent Skyler Henry continues to track the South Carolina primaries in Greenville. But let's begin with CBS News political director Fin Gómez. He's following the Maine Senate race. Good morning, Fin. So what do you make of this? Why did Platner's well-publicized controversies not cost him the Dem nomination?
Well, Errol, a few reasons, and one of them is timing. By the time the most of these damaging stories landed, this primary was effectively over. Governor Janet Mills, the candidate recruited by Senator Chuck Schumer and backed by establishment Democrats, suspended her campaign back in April, and that left Platner without a serious opponent on the ballot. So when the Wall Street Journal reported about the sexting scandal to other women earlier in his marriage, and the New York Times detailed allegations of troubling behavior towards women he dated, Democratic voters essentially had nowhere else to go. And frankly, most of them weren't looking for somewhere else to go, as evidenced by the wide margin last night. The other major reason is that most of his supporters are looking for change. Democrats understand that Maine is a crucial part of their strategy to take back the Senate. And bluntly, their desire to defeat Collins outweighed the controversies. The question is, will more controversies arise now that we're heading into the general election? Errol?
And Democrats view this contest in Maine as a must-win for them. Why? And does he really have a shot at defeating incumbent Senator Susan Collins, who's no stranger to stiff competition in that state?
As Anthony will tell you, it is a new electorate now. A Democratic primary electorate in Maine is not a November electorate. He has to appeal to a broader coalition of voters. He now has to bring in independents, moderate Democrats, and will also face increase efforts by Republican groups and super PACs who are already pouring tens of millions of dollars into the state. The controversies didn't cost him the nomination. Whether they cost him the general is the question that starts today. Look, Susan Collins is a formidable candidate who's running for her sixth term. She has a history of winning tough races in Maine. Yesterday, reporters caught up with the Maine senator before last night's election results to ask her about Platner. Here's what she had to say.
The allegations against Graham Platner are extremely troubling and serious, and he owes the people of Maine a detailed answer.
In 2020, the last time Collins ran, the Democratic Party was brimming with confidence about this exact seat. Collins overperformed nearly every poll, was outspent something like 2-1, Errol, and won by more than 8 points in a state that Trump lost by 9 in that election. This year is different. The climate favors Democrats, of course. But why does this Maine race matter so much? It will be one of the top races of the midterms and could determine the balance of power. Errol?
Nice to see. All right, great analysis there. Fin Gómez, thank you. We jump now to Skyler Henry in Greenville, South Carolina. Good morning, Skyler. On the Republican primary for governor there, it now heads to a runoff, and that excludes Congresswoman Nancy Mace. What happened?
Yeah. Well, the voters here in the Palmetto State decided that they would like to see a candidate more aligned with the values of President Donald Trump, considering the fact that he endorsed the lieutenant governor, Pamela Evan, late in this race, calling her a friend and fighter. She now moves to that June 23rd runoff alongside the state attorney general, Alan Wilson, who came to prominence just a couple of years ago as his state office had a major role in the case against Alec Murdaugh. You'll remember that story. Now we will see what will happen in the weeks moving ahead to that runoff. There is very little gaps, if you will, as it relates to the difference between their campaigns, so to speak. Both of them aligned with President Trump along with his messaging. Both of them sharing similar values on a range of issues. So I think it'll be interesting to see sort of how they sort of shape the narrative against one another in terms of why they feel as if they should be the better candidate moving forward. But to your point, this is the end of the road for Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who at one point in this race was widely viewed as the front runner up until fairly recently, where she fell out of lockstep with the Trump administration on a range of issues, namely calling for the release of the Epstein files, for one, and on the administration's perspective on foreign affairs, including the war with Iran. Mace now saying that she will endorse Alan Wilson. Take a listen.
I voted to release the Epstein files and lost some support for that. As a survivor, I chose to stand on principle and stand against the Epstein cover-up. And apparently, I chose wrong if the goal was winning an election.
So as we look ahead to that June 23rd runoff race, the winner in that race will face off against Jermaine Johnson, the longtime state representative, in November. Errol.
Right, and we'll have an update on the Epstein files in just a few minutes. Skyler, thank you. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, is here with all the data to discuss these election results. Anthony, good morning. Let's jump out to California. How did their race for governor play out?
Yeah, 1 week later, and that's typical for California. Often takes them a while to count most of the ballots. But look, here's the short story. Tom Steyer had been trying to catch Hilton. He won't. He didn't. Over time, he had started at about 19%, more ballots getting counted. A lot of Democrats had held on to their ballots, dropping them off on Election Day, mailing them in. That boosted Steyer over time up to what you see now at that 22.5%. Ran out of room, basically. Didn't catch up enough. And so that's why we project we can now go into the fall with Becerra and Republican Steve Hilton.
Let's jump back to the other side of the country, to Maine. The Senate race there, all the controversies around Graham Platner did not dent him, it seems. What does the data reveal?
Sea to shining sea here. Okay. In Maine, obviously a comfortable win for Platner, as Finn explained. That wasn't a surprise. When we look forward on this, a couple of numbers stand out. One is, I'll just put a 7 here on the board. That's roughly the amount by which Kamala Harris won Maine in the presidential race last time. That's basically your Democratic baseline, and it's why Democrats pick out Maine among a few states and say, okay, that's a state they think they can flip. They have a natural, maybe Democratic advantage. However, I'll put this on the board. Now, it's going back some years to 2020, but the last time Susan Collins ran, she got 13% of Democratic crossover voters. For context, that's like twice as many, more than twice as many as, say, Donald Trump does. So she's got that crossover appeal. You've got an older electorate in Maine that's voted for her many times in the past. And so that all nets out to what figures to be a very competitive race.
And one thing Finn touched on was that right now we're talking about the primary electorate, these kind of diehards on either side. The general electorate is different, but how so?
Well, it includes some of those potential crossover voters. That's number one. The other thing about Maine is when you look at it in the context of all the Senate races, we might talk about places like Texas. We might talk about places like Iowa. Yep. Maine is not a large state, so you're focused here on maybe 60,000 votes that the Democrats and Republicans may be fighting over in order to swing, and that makes it compelling too, because they may put money in because it doesn't have the large media markets, because it doesn't take the same expense, and yet you've got folks who may be very set in the way that they've been voting.
It's fascinating to think that some 60,000 voters in this one state could be a part of the formula for the balance of power in the Senate. Like, it really can come down to that. Anthony, Salvanto, love your analysis. Thanks so much. Great to see you this morning.